Hey, good morning, guys. We are looking at the second day of 10-4, so hopefully you've been able to work through the notes in the first part of 10-4, this idea of solving equations, solving quadratic equations by just doing what we've been doing before, doing the opposite and doing it to both sides, but now that opposite involves taking a square root. All right, so just a couple other examples here. They get a little more involved than the ones in yesterday, and then a real quick story problem. And then just got some homework for you to do, and I am just going to attach that homework, or have you attach that homework onto the day one homework, and just have you turn it in all at once. All right, so but let's get into this. All right, so it's the same thing. Again, if you want, you can draw your honkin' tonkin' line. And now we got to think about, what I want to do to get x by itself. All right. Now, again, I want to do order of operations backwards. All right. So I want to do everything opposite. So let's think if we knew what x was, the first thing I would do would be to add 6. So that's the last thing I'm going to do when we're solving this thing. The next thing I would do would be exponents. So I've done the stuff inside the grouping symbols. Then I do exponents. So that I would square whatever I get here. So the square root is going to be the second thing I do. And then the final thing that I would do, if I knew what x was here, would be to multiply this thing by 4. So again, I would do grouping symbols, exponents, and then multiplication. So when I'm undoing this, I want to do the exact opposite. So the first thing I want to do is I want to divide by 4. And again, that's perfectly okay as long as I divide by 4 on both sides. Now, some of you might be saying, but wait a minute, why can't we distribute? Well, because we've got to do that exponent first. And if I distribute, I'm almost doing multiplication before I do an exponent. All right. So, we don't want to distribute here. Again, we're doing order of operations, but we're doing it backwards. All right. So what that gives me, 4 divided by 4 is 1. All right. So what I get is x plus 6 squared equals 8. And so now if I think about order of operations, and again, doing them opposite, grouping symbols, then exponents. So I want to undo this exponent. And again, I undo an exponent, or I undo a squared exponent by doing the square root. All right. So what that gives me here, the square root of x plus 6 squared is just x plus 6. Again, these are inverses of each other, so they just cancel each other out. And now the square root of 8, I don't know what that is. It's an irrational number, and I don't want to deal with that irrational number right now. So I'm just going to keep it as the square root of 8. Okay. But again, remember, anytime we do the square root, when we're solving these equations, we get that positive or negative root. All right. So it's perfectly okay to leave that as the square root of 8. You're not going, it's just like writing pi. All right. This is just a number. It's an irrational number. It's, a little bit less than 3. I know that because the square root of 9 would be 3. So this is a little bit less than that. And we might look at later what that is. All right. And then finally, I would subtract 6. All right. Now, a couple different ways you can write this. You could write, again, I can't combine these, and this is under a square root, and so wouldn't be like the square root of 2. I can't, subtract when it comes to doing this. So a couple different ways you could write this. All right, and I'll take either answer. You can say the positive negative square root of 8 minus 6. That's okay, but a lot of times, when you're writing that square root, if you get a little carried away here, they can't tell, does that square root go over the whole thing? Is it the square root of 8 minus 6, or is it the square root of 8 minus 6? So a better way to write this would be negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 8. And I'm perfectly okay with that answer. All right, that's an exact answer. We haven't done any rounding, and that is our answer. Now, if you do want to see, well, about what is this? All right, again, my calculator is going to look a little bit different from yours. All right, but we just do so. There's 2 answers here. I want to do negative 6 plus the square root of 8. All right, so I do negative 6 plus the square root of 8. And that gives me about negative 3 and 1700ths. All right, so negative 3 and 1700ths, about. All right, and then I also want to do negative 6 minus the square root of 8. All right, so I do negative 6 minus the square root of 8. And that gives me about negative 8 and 8300ths. If I was going to round to the nearest hundredth, that 2 would bump that, or that 8 would bump that 2 up. So about negative 8 and 8300ths. Okay. And again, these are approximately the two answers that would make this equation true. Now, if we went and checked them, it probably wouldn't because we've done some rounding. All right, even just cutting that off at the at the hundredths place might throw us off enough here. We wouldn't get exactly 32, but we should get pretty close to it. But again, so these are the decimal approximations of it, but I am perfectly okay. Matter of fact, I'd prefer this answer. -6 plus or minus the square root of 8. So just a similar problem. Now, you can pause the video right now, try this one on your own, and then see if you get what we're about to get, or if you just want to watch us and solve it with me together, we can do that as well. All right, so again, order of operations, I've got multiplication, I've got grouping symbols, and I've got an exponent. Again, grouping symbols, exponents, then multiplication. I want to undo that, so I want to undo the multiplication first. So the first thing I'm going to do after, of course, I draw my honkin' tonkin' line, is divide by 6. All right, so 6 divided by 6 is 1, so I get x minus 4 squared equals, and 42 divided by 6 is 7. Now, grouping symbols would come first and then exponents when I was doing order of operations. So since we're undoing this, I want to get rid of that exponent first. So the opposite of a square is the square root. And the square root of x minus 4 squared is just x minus 4. And this, the square root of 7, again, it's an irrational number. So I'm just going to leave it the square root of 7. But again, don't forget it's the positive square root of 7 and the negative square root of 7. And then finally, the last thing I want to do is add 4. All right. And again, it's okay to put the positive, negative square root of 7 plus 4. But again, a better answer would be 4 plus or minus the square root of 7. And again, two irrational numbers, that's what's going to make this thing true. But again, it's using square roots to solve quadratics. We're undoing this thing. Now, the other part of your notes are going to be, some story problems here. And this is going to go back to that vertical motion model. So let me get that in here. Remember, that's h equals -16t squared plus vt plus s, where h is the height of this thing at any time in seconds. V is its initial velocity, and s is its initial height. All right, so let's look here. Says you drop your phone from a balcony 18 feet above your friend who catches it 3 feet above the ground. How long is your phone in the air? All right, so how long is your phone in the air? That tells me right now we're trying to find t. All right, t is going to be our variable here. All right, so let's fill in what we know. Well, the height, all right, now again, we got two different heights, but one of these is the initial height, and one is the height at the end of this thing, all right? So the 3 feet is the height at the end of it. So I'm just going to slide this over here just because I'm going to run into my picture. So 3 is going to get filled in for h. -16t squared, again, that's going to stay my variable because that's what we're trying to find. Plus, now, vt, its initial velocity. Now, I am just, or you, I would never do this, and I don't know why you're doing it. You're dropping this. All right, you're not throwing it. All right, so the initial velocity is actually just 0. All right, so this would be 0 times t, and I don't care what t is, that would just be 0. So I could put plus 0 in there, but that's a waste of time. So I'm just going to leave that out. And then plus s, all right, that would be your initial height. All right, so I'm going to put in plus 18. And so now I've got an equation I can solve. All right. Now, again, I don't see any t terms. All I see is a t squared. So that means we can do what we've been doing. Let's get t by itself. So again, I've got multiplication, I've got an exponent, and I've got addition. Order of operations would say exponent, multiplication, then addition. Solving this, we rewind that. So we're going to do addition, multiplication, exponent by doing the opposite. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is subtract 18. That gives me -15 equals -16t squared. Next thing I'm going to do, again, I've got multiplication and an exponent. Order of operations would say exponents before multiplication, but remember, we're undoing this, so I want to divide by -16. And now rather than type this in, I'm just going to leave it. And now negative divided by a negative is going to be a positive. But rather than get the decimal for this, I'm just going to leave it 15/16. Okay? Fractions can be okay. And over here, I'm going to get t squared. And now I want to square root both sides. All right. So again, your calculator is going to look a little bit different from mine. All right, but we do want to do that square root, and you can do a fraction. You can do a square root. Use your ABC button and do a fraction. And now remember, so you're going to get the positive and negative of that. All right. So t is going to equal the positive and negative root, square root of 15/16. Now here, I do want an answer. I want to know, hey, about how long is this phone going to be in the air? All right. So I'm going to do, again, my calculator is going to look a little bit different from you, but I'm going to do the square root of 15/16. And it tells me it's about 97 hundredths of a second. Again, rounding to the nearest hundredth, that 8 would bump that 7 up. 7 up. All right. So we would get positive or negative 97 hundredths of a second. But now, since we're talking time, remember we talked about this before. Sometimes when you're solving these things, again, this is a solution to that equation, but negative 97 hundredths of a second doesn't make any sense. We're only going to look at the positive here. So this phone is going to be in the air just a little bit less than a second, about 97 hundredths of a second. Okay. All right. So again, solving quadratics, doing the opposite, doing it to each side. But again, a little bit more involved because we've got a few more order of operations there. And again, the answer is going to look a little goofy, but but that's an exact answer. We're not doing any rounding. All right. Again, that's the answer I prefer. All right. Unless you get to a story problem and we're actually trying to answer this thing. All right. Continue your homework on 10-4 and just include these problems in onto what you guys did on 10-4 the other day. All right. And I'm just going to grade this all. I want you to post this all on Flipgrid as one big assignment. And I'm going to grade it all together, but I did just kind of want to break it up for you. All right. So get these problems finished up. Let me know if you have any questions. Take care, guys.